So we can put an English social studies classroom with a math science classroom, enhance those two spaces as a learning team, and provide a very quality education for sixth graders. We want to explore, these aren't decisions, but we want to explore options, and that's one of them we want to look at. And then we can bring in the types of science classroom environments that are exciting in even the sixth grade educational experience. For the upper grades, a very common trend in middle school, adopted by the National Middle School Association, is to create a cluster of classrooms, math, science, social studies, English, and a pair of science labs, which you'll see in the lower left-hand side. In the upper right-hand side, there are many ways to configure this. The reason we want to look at many options is we're dealing with remodeled buildings, and so we want to make sure we reconfigure in a way that's most suitable for the building we're facing. By simply taking a double-loaded corridor, that is a hallway with general classrooms on both sides, and probably the most common and cost-effective construction system ever created, we can carve out areas that also create resource spaces adjacent to science, and this time including technology education. What's that? Robotics, hydroponics, hydraulics. We can bring those problem-solving curricula to the middle school adjacent to math and science and create a much more connected educational issue like we talked about in the pyramid, curriculum and creativity working together. I couldn't help but put this picture on. This was a model that very much fit the pattern we talked about. It wasn't adopted by the school district. But interestingly, that very principal who helped create it went on to become the executive director of the National Middle School Association. The reason I say that is that when we explore these options, we're not bringing you ideas that haven't been tested and proven to be correct. And we're not trying to come up with a long home run ball at the last minute of the game. We're bringing ideas that have been tested and true and can show their performance across the United States and Canada. Let's go to the next one. But we want to go further, pushing the box a little bit. I think that was my mission. This is one of the finest examples of middle school I've ever worked on. It happens to be Scarsdale, New York. But what they did was they clustered some general classrooms, as we saw in the two previous examples. They created a resource area, the dark green, where students can go out and work in small groups and teams. They then brought in guidance counseling, placed guidance counselors right in the neighborhood so that when the parent comes to visit, they're working as a counselor with the child, social worker with the child right in the neighborhood, not in an office down the hall. They brought the dining room into the neighborhood so the children really dine. They don't have a feeding frenzy in the cafeteria. So the issue of seeing dining, social services, toilets, education, shared areas, and then they added even one more, technology education, robotics programs that match the science curricula. So the point of seeing a complete, integrated, closed neighborhood for learning is one of the best models we can move toward in today's profile of education. So let's take what we just saw in that example and bump up to the Disney Celebration School. Interestingly, we planned that school 15 years ago this month, and there's an article coming out on it, by the way. But what did this school test? It tested in a new building how to create different sized educational spaces based on different educational situations. So in the lower left and right, you see the general classrooms, if you will. In the very bottom, you see studios for small group instruction. Up in the middle, you start seeing the group instructional activities like we're doing right here today, 5 or 6 people working at a table. Yet you can go further up the middle and see individual learning carols. Science to the far left and actually restroom facilities to the far right. That's not as entertaining, but it's an important issue to keep your restrooms close to learning. But I want to use that as a learning model because it set the benchmark for what has become small learning communities across the United States and Canada. So let's go to the next picture. Coming out of Disney Celebration, the question faced was, that's really great, but what about the rest of us across the United States? How can we apply the issues learned at the Celebration School to other schools in the country cost effectively, and most importantly, in remodeled buildings? So let's look at that double-loaded corridor we talked about earlier. We can carve out a simple resource area by reconfiguring those double-loaded corridors that way, for example. But if you take more walls out or make more adjustments and make a science lab adjacent to that double-loaded corridor, you can create a very broadly based educational program. Am I saying to do that here? Not in your life. But my mission was to bring trends and let's at least see what people are doing. But if one of you said, you know, I sort of like that, but prove it to me. Well, I've heard that about Missouri, remember? Show me. You could do it in one of your corridors. You don't have to do it in every corridor. See if it works. So the point I'm trying to show you is these ideas don't have to be taken completely. They can be implemented over time, tested, see if they're right for you. But I wanted to show them to you anyway. Let's look at this school for a minute, Wyoming. They're sort of a show-me state type of town, state as well. This happens to be Lovell High School we worked on a few years ago. An old, I say old not compared to some of your older schools, but certainly built in the early 1960s, late 1950s. They were going to get a brand new school, $15 million paid for by the state. The only problem was they had to wait 15 years to get it. And all along the time they were going to remodel and fix the roofs and windows, everything in this old building until then. Working with the school district, I said, you've got great opportunity in this old building. We can create a school of the future in what you think is a school of the past. So if you look to the far right, you're going to see in a minute one of the learning models of the neighborhood that I just demonstrated was the foundation of the Disney Celebration School. On the left-hand side, you see the double-loaded corridor, a resource space, team teaching area, science integrated, and even special ed classes in a defined learning situation that creates a small learning community in a larger enrollment school. Most importantly, this was done for 25 cents on the dollar. A quarter of the cost of the new building. So the state said, why wait? Let's move it up on our thinking. Not only that, because they have a master plan, all their remodeling dollars are being spent in line with the expected solution. Rather than spending valuable remodeled dollars on an under-enrolled school based on education of the past. So you've got not only better funding strategies, but you have better educational results. Oh, could we go back one, please? On the right, this one's very relevant to you. They had one of the oldest fuddy-duddy science labs I'd ever seen. Like your schools, perfectly dimensioned for a science lab of the future. So rather than building a new science building or something like that, they were able to remodel, the right-hand photo, a science lab to be as good as any science lab in America, again for 25 cents on the dollar rather than building new. And every one of your science labs at your high school are those exact same dimensions. So I'm trying to paint a picture of educational change in a context of your opportunity to embrace it. That's what the school looks like now. That's a nice, clean, good-looking school. And it's 25 cents on the dollar as far as providing a school of the future rather than a school of the past. Back one, please. Let's go and finishing up here. I've talked about modalities of learning, visual learning in particular. If we take that idea of not understanding a box square from a rectangle, hey, what's the big deal? They're only little kids. But let's take that up to a high school advanced placement science lab. On the right, you see a teacher, and on the left, you see multimedia with the same teacher. When I tested what the students saw, they could not tell a P from an F, or an E from a B, or a D from a C. Those sound like little issues, but if you're talking about formulas, you need to read them reasonably accurately. The point is, the layout of that room was totally inappropriate for the educational activities of science. Let's go to the next one. Those students in this example, like some of your schools, were almost 35 to 40 feet away from that TV. They can't hear accurately by any means.